The world didn't break when that veto landed, it shifted. And if you're sitting there watching the news cycle spin this story into background noise, I need you to stop and really absorb what just happened at the United Nations on April 7th, 2026, because this is not just another diplomatic footnote buried under headlines about tariffs and Twitter fights. This is the moment a fundamental restructuring of global power announced itself without apology, without hesitation, and without a single bullet being fired. 11 countries voted in favor of a resolution aimed at securing the Strait of Hormuz, and it was killed, stone dead, by the vetoes of China and Russia. 11 countries. Think about that number. That's a supermajority of the Security Council saying the world needs this waterway open. And 2 countries, sitting in permanent seats inherited from a post-World War II order that is now visibly crumbling, looked at that consensus and said no. What you witnessed was not a procedural disagreement. What you witnessed was a declaration that the age of American-led international institutions bending the world to Washington's will is over. And if you don't understand why that changes everything, and your gas prices, your grocery bills, your retirement account, your country's leverage in every room where decisions get made, then stay right here, because we're going to walk through every layer of this together. Shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has been largely blocked by Iran since February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched an air campaign against Iran and killed its supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Let that sink in. The supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, dead. And the world did not go quiet after that. It exploded. In retaliation, Iran launched missile and drone attacks on Israel, U.S. military bases, and U.S. allied Gulf states, and Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued warnings forbidding passage through the strait, confirmed 21 attacks on merchant ships, and reportedly laid sea mines in the waterway. So we are not talking about a diplomatic spat. We are talking about an active war, a major maritime choke point sealed shut, and energy markets in free fall. This is the context in which China cast that veto. And context, as any serious analyst will tell you, is everything. Now, I want you to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually means in physical economic terms, because the media likes to throw around percentages without helping you feel the weight of them. Approximately 20% of global crude oil and liquefied natural gas exports pass through the Strait of Hormuz, making it critical for international energy security. 1/5 of the world's oil and gas. Through a narrow channel between Iran, Oman, and the UAE. That's not a shipping lane. That's the jugular vein of the global economy. When that vein is clamped, the blood stops flowing, and right now it is clamped. Shipping through the narrow waterway has effectively come to a standstill. The blockade has sent fuel prices soaring across much of the world, and some countries, particularly in Asia, have introduced restrictions on consumption and begun rationing supplies. People in Asia are rationing fuel right now, today, while you're watching this video. And the United Nations, the institution specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of humanitarian and economic catastrophe, just failed to act, not because it lacked votes, but because 2 permanent members decided the crisis served their interests more than its resolution did. That is the sentence you need to carry with you through everything that follows. China and Russia decided this crisis serves their interests. Let me explain why, and let me do it without the sanitizing language of diplomatic press releases, because you deserve the unvarnished truth. Iran agreed on March 26th to allow ships owned by 5 nations, China, Russia, India, Iraq, and Pakistan, to transit the Strait of Hormuz. Read that again slowly. Iran shut the strait to the world, but opened it selectively to its friends, to its partners, to the countries that share its vision of a post-American international order. China gets its oil, Russia gets its influence validated, India gets passage because it walks a careful line between East and West. And the Western world, Europe, the United States, Japan, South Korea, the Gulf states, they sit outside that arrangement, watching their energy supplies strangle. This is not chaos. This is architecture. Iran didn't just close a waterway in panic and rage. Iran, guided by the logic of a country that has been sanctioned and isolated and pressured for decades, is now wielding the one instrument of leverage that Washington cannot simply bomb away without consequences that spiral beyond anything the Pentagon is ready to absorb. And China looked at that architecture and said, "We like this building. We are not going to let the Security Council tear it down." The initial proposal by Bahrain would have authorized countries to use all necessary means, UN wording that would include military action, to ensure transit through the Strait of Hormuz and deter attempts to close it. That language was there at the start. It was strong. It was clear. It was the kind of language that, in the old world order, the United States could have pushed through with a phone call. But this is not the old world. After Russia, China, and France, All veto-wielding countries on the 15-member Security Council expressed opposition to approving the use of force. The resolution was revised to eliminate all references to offensive action. And then, after all that weakening, after all that concession, after the drafters stripped the resolution down to the bones and removed even the teeth, China and Russia still vetoed it. That tells you something profound. This was never about the language of the resolution. This was about the message. China and Russia were sending a signal to the world that they will not allow the United Nations to be used as a tool of American foreign policy, not even when the resolution is toothless, not even when it's wrapped in the language of humanitarian concern, not even when 11 other countries are begging them to abstain. Chinese Ambassador Fu Kong said the draft failed to capture the root causes and the full picture of the conflict in a comprehensive and balanced manner, and expressed hope that peace and stability would be restored. That's the public statement. Diplomatic, measured. But between the lines, what Fu Kong was really saying is this: you started this war, America. You and Israel launched the strikes on February 28th. You killed Khamenei. You destabilized the Persian Gulf. And now you want the United Nations to clean up your mess in a way that advantages you militarily and politically? No. The answer is no. Russia's ambassador Vasily Nebenzia said that the resolution presented Iranian actions as the sole source of regional tensions, while illegal attacks by the United States and Israel were not mentioned at all. And here is the uncomfortable reality that Americans need to sit with. He has a point, not because Iran's behavior in the Strait is acceptable. Not because mining international shipping lanes and attacking civilian infrastructure across 10 countries is defensible. It is not. But Nebenzia's argument cuts to something real, which is that the resolution was drafted to condemn Iran's response while treating the American and Israeli military campaign that triggered it as invisible, as though the war began on February 28th in a vacuum, with Iran simply deciding one morning to close the world's most important oil corridor for no reason. The Security Council chamber is a room full of adults who know history, and they know that cause and effect don't disappear because a resolution chooses not to mention them. Now let's talk about what this means for you, for Americans, because I think there's a tendency in this country to watch geopolitical events like spectators in a stadium as though the outcome doesn't come home. It comes home. It always comes home. 1/5 of the world's oil typically passes through the Strait, and Iran's stranglehold during the war has sent energy prices soaring around the world. Energy prices don't just affect your gas tank. They ripple through the entire supply chain of every product you buy. Trucks run on diesel. Ships run on fuel oil. Factories consume energy. When energy gets more expensive, everything gets more expensive. Your groceries, your Amazon packages, your heating bill, your airline tickets. And the longer this strait stays closed, the deeper that inflation bites. The American consumer is not a spectator in this crisis. The American consumer is absorbing it in real time, whether they realize it or not. And then there is the deeper question of what this moment reveals about American power, or more precisely, about the limits of it. The United States went to the UN Security Council, presented a resolution so weakened and so carefully laundered of any controversial language that even France had to be coaxed along, and it still lost. It still got vetoed. And here is what that means strategically, because I've spent enough of my life studying these power structures to read the subtext clearly. When you go to the Security Council with a deliberately weak resolution and you still can't get it through, you are not in a position of strength. You are in a position where your opponents are willing to absorb the diplomatic cost of an 11-2 vote because they are confident enough in their own position to not care what the scoreboard says. China does not need the UN to validate its moves. China needs the UN to not constrain them. And that's exactly what this veto accomplished. After the vote, Bahrain's foreign minister expressed regret that the council did not adopt the draft, stating that such inaction undermines the organ's credibility and that failing to adopt this resolution sends the wrong signal to the world. He's right. It sends the wrong signal if you're a country that still believes in the old signal system. But China isn't operating on that system anymore. China is operating on a different signal system entirely, one based on relationships, bilateral agreements, economic leverage, and selective access, like the decision to let Chinese-flagged vessels transit the strait while American and European ships sit idle. That selective access is perhaps the most important development in this entire story that is receiving the least attention. Think about what Iran just operationalized. It turned a geographic choke point into a geopolitical sorting mechanism. Friendly countries get through, unfriendly countries don't. And China, the world's largest importer of oil, is in the friendly column, which means that while American allies scramble for alternative supply routes and watch their energy costs spiral, China is buying discounted Iranian oil through an open corridor, strengthening its energy security and doing it all without firing a single shot. That is an extraordinary strategic advantage gained at zero military cost. A limited number of vessels linked to China, Russia, India, Pakistan, and other friendly countries have been permitted to cross the strait, which typically carries around 1/5 of the world's oil. The architecture of a new economic order is being laid out right in front of us in the Persian Gulf. Countries that align with the emerging multipolar framework, China, Russia, and their partners, get energy access. Countries that align with American hegemony do not. This is the new reality. And no UN resolution, however carefully worded, is going to change it, because the veto just told us that China will not allow the old institutions to interfere with the new architecture. Trump has criticized U.S. allies for not deploying warships to protect the vital strait, while also claiming it will open up naturally when the war ends. That statement is telling in its own right. It tells you that Washington doesn't have a clean answer here. Sending warships into a mined strait under active IRGC attack is not a simple military operation. It's a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. And if American warships start taking fire in the Persian Gulf, the escalation logic becomes almost impossible to control. So the administration is caught in a trap of its own making. It started a war, it killed the supreme leader, it destabilized the energy market, and now it's threatening deadlines that keep getting extended because the alternative is an escalation that could make everything dramatically worse. Pakistan and China jointly announced a 5-point plan calling for an immediate end to hostilities, the launch of inclusive peace talks, the protection of civilians and critical infrastructure, the restoration of maritime security in the strait, and a firm reaffirmation of international law. That 5-point plan is not just a diplomatic gesture, it is China and Pakistan positioning themselves as the adults in the room, as the responsible global actors, while the United States drops deadlines it doesn't keep and threatens civilizations in late-night social media posts. China is playing a long game here. It is building its credibility as a responsible global power with the global South, with Muslim-majority nations, with countries that have watched decades of American military intervention produce instability rather than the promised democracy and security. And the moral weight of the argument, whether you agree with it or not, carries enormous power in the developing world. When China's ambassador says the resolution failed to capture the root causes of the conflict, leaders in Africa and Southeast Asia and Latin America nod in recognition because they have lived through the pattern. They have seen what American-led regime change operations look like. They have buried their infrastructure under the wreckage of wars fought in the name of freedom. And now they see China standing at the UN, exercising its veto not to expand its own military footprint, but to say, we will not legitimize this. And that message lands very differently in Nairobi and Jakarta and Bogota than it does on Fox News or MSNBC. Bahrain's representative warned that if the council permits the Strait of Hormuz to remain closed, such a scenario would inevitably be replicated in other straits and waterways, thereby transforming the world into a jungle where force, arrogance, and hegemony prevail. It's a powerful warning, but here's the brutal irony. The countries that Bahrain implicitly accuses of enabling that jungle are the same countries that many in the developing world accuse of having built the jungle in the first place. This is the hall of mirrors that American foreign policy finds itself in right now. The credibility deficit is real, and no resolution, no deadline, no warship deployment resolves a credibility deficit. Only patient, consistent, principled behavior over time does that, and Washington is in the middle of a war it started that is destabilizing the global energy supply. That is not the starting point for a credibility recovery. What we are watching in the waters of the Persian Gulf and in the chambers of the United Nations is the death rattle of a unipolar world, the world that America built after 1991, the world in which American power was so overwhelming that even its adversaries had to play by its rules most of the time. That world is gone. It didn't die in one dramatic moment. It eroded over years of misadventure in Iraq and Libya and Syria and Afghanistan. And now in the spring of 2026, with the Strait of Hormuz closed and China's veto echoing through the Security Council chamber, the obituary is being written in real time. China didn't just block a resolution. China drew a line and showed the world it could hold it. Russia stood beside it. 11 countries who voted the other way know that their votes were ultimately decorative, and the global order is quietly, irreversibly reorganizing itself around that fact.